morning. Everybody hear me all right? Sounds good. Wow, 10 minutes in between speakers is really, really fast. With people trying to tear their laptops out and other people trying to connect everything in and get VMs up and running, it was really, really crunch time there. So good morning, everybody. How are you guys doing? Good conference so far? Everybody having fun? Learning some really cool stuff? Awesome. Well, I bet you can tell that I'm not from here. It's pretty obvious. I'm from the States. My name is Rhonda Layfield, and I've been in IT for quite some time. I joined the Navy back in 1982 and spent 7 years in the U.S. Navy, and that's where I learned computers. And I love the fact that they have you take a test to find out where your aptitude lies. What would you be good at? And they said, oh, you'd be good with computers. I'm like, okay. I lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma, right in the middle of the country, and we have really, really horrible, hot, humid summers, and our winters are big ice storms where the trees get pulled over on power lines. All I wanted to do was leave Tulsa, Oklahoma. So I said, okay, I'll go do computers with the Navy. So that's how I got started. I now write for Windows IT Pro magazine. How many of you guys get that? Not a lot here. Okay, for those of you who do, this year starting in March, I've been writing every month deployment articles. So how to get started with MDT, and I kind of bottom line, step by step, everything you need to do. So there's not a lot of explanation. It's more of like a lab that you would walk through to get things set up in your environment. So I've done a whole bunch on MDT and on WDS. So if you get a chance, you can look at those online, or you can look at them in the magazine. I'm a setup and deployment MVP and a desktop deployment product specialist. I'm not going to spend any more time on myself. We have 60-minute sessions here, and this is a 75-minute deck. So we'll see how quickly I can get through it without going too fast. The whole purpose of this session is to migrate some XP machines to Windows 7. But our users have some stuff on those XP machines. Maybe some data, user settings like IE favorites, desktop settings, they want things to look the same. And they also have some applications and their settings installed. What we want to do is we want to maintain as much of that user's state, which is what that's called, as possible when we migrate that computer to Windows 7. So we're going to maintain users' data, user settings, applications, some, not all, and application settings. The tool I'm going to use is the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit Update 1. Just shipped a few weeks ago. And by the way, everything I'm showing you today is free. It's a free download from Microsoft. It really is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Step 1, you're going to need to install MDT. The only requirement is you need the Wake, the Windows Automated Installation Kit version 2.0. You might have better luck finding it if you look for Windows Automated Installation Kit for Windows 7 version 1.0. It's the same thing. So make sure you get the right Wake to install on MDT 2010 Update 1. You don't have to install MDT on a server class operating system if you don't want to. You could put it on a desktop operating system like Windows 7 if you're a smaller shop. I always recommend putting it on a server class OS, in fact, the latest and greatest if possible. So Server 2008 R2 is going to give you all the bells and whistles. What I mean by that is easy integration with Windows Deployment Service, or WDS. Has anybody heard of WDS? Probably about 50% of the crowd. For those who haven't, it's the new Remote Installation Service, or the new RIS. Once you've installed MDT, you have something called an MDT Deployment Server. What you can do on that server is add an operating system to deploy to your clients. The one we're going to use today is Windows 7. Then you need to add your applications that you want to have deployed. Any packages. Packages would be operating system patches or language packs. And then drivers you'd like to have deployed as well. Step 3, have those XP, and notice half of my clients are SP2. So it's actually supported XP SP2 as well as SP3 for the migration purpose. Have those clients connect to the MDT's deployment share. Then they'll go ahead and download Windows 7, replacing XP on those machines, and add each application that you've told it to add back to that machine along with its settings. So that sounds pretty easy, right? I didn't tell you all the steps. I'm going to save those because they're different for different scenarios. Let me show you what this looks like. I'm on my XP machine, and what I've done so far is I've done start run, and I connected to my MDTs. The name of the server is 2010 server, the deployment share, and then the scripts folder. I have this all documented for you in the slide deck, but if I start it then, we won't have time to see if it completes properly or not. So I've launched this, which opened this folder for me. The file I'm going to run is lighttouch.vbs. Take just a second to launch here. And I get a list of something called task sequences, which I'm going to show you how to create in a second. It takes almost 30 seconds to create one. So I'm going to choose the one and only task sequence I have right now that is supposed to refresh XP machines to Windows 7. We'll choose that. Click Next. I am going to refresh this computer. I'm going to maintain the same. In fact, I'm going to change the computer name. Let's call this Win7, and it's a marketing machine. What you'll get is you'll get the current computer name. So you can choose to change it if you'd like, or you can leave it the same. We'll click Next, and we'll join a domain with the administrator account. And it'll be the deploy domain. This is where you're telling it. If you want to go look at that XP machine and gather all your users' data, settings, and application settings, this is where you're gathering user state. So I'm going to tell it, yes, I want to gather the user's data and settings, and I would like to store it locally if there's enough hard drive space. That's what this second box is for. If you don't want to do that, you can also choose specify a location and save the same information and put it on a server across the network. In this scenario, I'm going to save it locally. You can choose to do a complete backup of this machine before you start the deployment. Some people like to do this for the president's machine or VPs, people that you really can't have any downtime for. So even if your deployment went belly up in the middle, you have an image that you could bring back down and apply immediately. And within 30 minutes, you'd have that machine back to what it was originally. I'm going to choose to not back it up, so it'll be a little bit quicker for us. Choose your languages. I'm going to leave it set to English. And the time zone. Let's see if we can't find Auckland. And notice that it found XML Notepad is currently installed on this machine. It was smart enough to know that that is actually installed already. I'm going to show you how to set it up so that NDT knows how to go look and see what's currently installed. Also notice that if I wanted to, I could deselect that. Well, how many of you have applications that currently exist on your XP machine, you want them installed on Windows 7, and you don't want anyone to change it? Does anybody have that scenario? Quite a few of you. Let me show you one simple change. I'm going to cancel this. We're going to cruise through this really quickly next time. I'm on my 2010 server. And just to mention one more time, I'm going to show you every step of this in the slide deck. I just have to make one little tiny change to a script. In my deployment share, in my scripts folder, ltiappdetect.com, I'm going to make one little change down here where I tell it mandatory, make sure I spelled that right, applications. Close that, save my changes. Let's go back to that XP machine. And I'm going to relaunch the lighttouch.vbs, and we're going to cruise through this really quickly this time. But I want to show you how you can make these applications mandatory. Oh, really? There we go. Let's just do this one more time. And this time the application should come up. It'll be selected, and you cannot deselect it. give it a name. Join a domain, deploy. Go ahead and save that user state. Don't create a backup. Language preferences. Up to find Auckland. We'll do next. Notice now how it's not selectable. That's showing me it's a pre-selected application and it will be selected and you can't change that here. So those are for some of your applications that have to be on every single machine, regardless of who's running the deployment. We'll click next. And the last thing it's going to ask is, do I want to enable BitLocker after I've installed Windows 7 on this machine? I'm going to choose not to at this time, but you can choose to go ahead and enable BitLocker. It'll carve out that 100 meg partition up front that BitLocker needs, and you can also decide where you'd like to put your recovery key on this same screen. Tell it the credentials to connect to that 2010 deployment share, and we're going to let this run for a while. One of the nice things I like about this wizard, when the deployment wizard runs, it shows you every single step it's doing. One of the bad things about it is if you get an error message, it throws that error message up on the screen right underneath this box. And it doesn't matter where you move it. The error message will come up right underneath that box so you can't see it. If it's a big enough error message, it'll poke out on the sides, you'd see it. But if it's little, and you think you've been sitting on this same screen for a really long time and it doesn't usually do this, move the box and see if there's an error message underneath it. I can't tell you how many times I have sat there and thought, man, it's taken like 2.5 hours this time to do this one step. And then I moved the box and it's like, oh, you idiot. It errored out like an hour and 45 minutes ago. All right, now let me show you how we set that up. I'm going to let that run. But before I get into how we set it up, I want to explain just a little bit of terminology, the 4 deployment scenarios. The first scenario is a bare metal machine. It's a brand new computer with no operating system on it, or you're going to wipe it clean and install Windows 7. We're not doing that. A refresh machine is you have an existing piece of hardware. You want to keep that existing piece of hardware. You just want to change it from XP to Windows 7, so you're going to refresh the operating system on the same piece of hardware. That's a refresh. The replace, you're getting rid of that old piece of hardware, bringing in a new machine, but on that old XP machine, you still want to maintain user settings, data, and application settings. So you've got to store those on a server somewhere, bring in the brand new box, put Windows 7 on it, and then bring those back down to the Windows 7 machine. That's a replace scenario. And how many of you think you can upgrade from XP to Windows 7? There is no direct upgrade path. You could choose to upgrade your XP machine to Vista and then Vista to Windows 7. Does anybody want to do that? Can't see any problems with that happening. So unless you're upgrading directly from Vista, there's no direct upgrade path. We call it a migration. The 2 scenarios I'm going to talk about here are the refresh and the replace scenarios. Here's your refresh scenario. I gave you like the 50,000 kilometer view on those first, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3 slides. We're going to go a little bit deeper into it now and find there's a few more steps than what I mentioned. So I've got my XP, SP2, or SP3 machine. I have my MDT 2010 deployment server. Step 1, I'm going to sit down at that XP machine and figure out which applications are currently there that I also want put on that Windows 7 machine. I'm going to grab some information off that XP machine, and then I'm going to take it to my MDT deployment server and configure the deployment server with those applications and that specific information. Then, just like you saw me run lighttouch.vbs, I'm going to go to my XP machines and I'm going to kick off lighttouch.vbs running from the deployment server. And these steps you won't see. All of a sudden, you'll get a list of applications that have been configured on the deployment server. Let's say we have 3 applications that we've configured on the deployment server that we also want to go to that Windows 7 machine. The next step, MDT deployment wizard. looks at that XP machine and looks at all the applications that are installed. We might have 40 applications installed on that machine, but only 3 configured on the MDT deployment server. So what happens is it looks for those specific 3, gathers information for it, and then it creates a third list, which is those 3 applications. Those are the pre-selected applications that will be deployed to the Windows 7 machine. Then it gathers user state. We already mentioned users' data, settings, application settings. That's referred to as user state. And we're going to store it locally in this scenario. The next step, boots to a Windows pre-installation environment, or WinPE, and then installs Windows 7. Applications, those 3 applications we told it to install, get installed to the Windows 7 machine. And then User State Migration Tool, USMT, under the hood, runs again, and this time it loads the information back into the Windows 7 registry. So that's kind of a little deeper dive into exactly what we're going to do. And I'll show you how to set up each one of these steps. This is how you do it. Step 1 was to gather information from that XP machine. Log on as a standard user. There's really no reason to log on as an administrator. You don't need read-write access to the registry. Log on as a standard user because you're really just on a fact-finding mission. You need to go in there and find some uninstall key names is what you're looking for. So if you notice, we've opened the registry. We're down to HKey local machine, software, Microsoft, Windows, current version, and then we're looking at the uninstall keys. These are your uninstall key names down here for all the applications that are installed on this machine. The executables are pretty easy to read. The executables usually put an uninstall key that makes sense, like IE, Direct Draw, Direct Animation, NetMeeting, Outlook Express. Those make sense. But when you install a lot of MSI applications, they input a globally unique identifier, or a GUID. And those aren't quite as easy to figure out. So you might have to highlight each GUID and then look over in the display panel to find the display name. And this is where I found XML Notepad. You're going to copy that key name into a Notepad file. This is the easiest way to do it. You don't want to type those GUIDs out. So copy it into a Notepad file on your XP machine. It's going to look like that when you paste it into your Notepad file. But you don't need the whole path to it. All we're looking for is one piece of information, and that's the GUID. If you're doing a whole bunch of applications from that same XP machine, gather all the data on that one machine. So in this scenario, I'm doing XML Notepad. Here's the GUID for that. Netmon 3.4, here's the GUID for that. Office 2007, here's a GUID for that. It's all in that same Notepad file. Then you want to email the Notepad file to yourself or put it on a USB, take it over to the MDT deployment server. You're going to be using those uninstalled registry keys inside your application details once you've added applications to the deployment workbench. It looks like this, but let me show you. On the 2010 server, once you install MDT, the snap-in you use is called the deployment workbench. That's what we're looking at here. To add an application, I would right-click Applications and choose New Application. A nice friendly wizard's going to pop up. Oh, I know he's busy. I gave both machines like 2 gigs of RAM to run too, so it's going to slow down other things just a little bit. I can add applications here. I could either choose to add an application with source files, which XML Notepad. If I go into C, Apps folder, this is the file I want to deploy to my clients and then install the application. So this is the source file for deployment. So I can tell it an application with source file, an application that's someplace else on the network, so I could input the ONC path, the server name, shared folder name, and application. Or I could do an application bundle and choose 3 applications that need to be installed. But if application 2 doesn't install properly, I don't want 3 to install at all. So you can set up dependencies between them with an application bundle. I'm going to stick with application with source files and click Next. Publisher, application name. You can choose to put version and language. Point to where that source file resides, which was on my C drive, in the apps folder, and click OK. Next. This is the name of the directory inside the deployment share that will be created. Click Next, the command line. It's an MSI, so I'll have to do MSI exec and XML, notepad.msi. I want it to install quietly and do not restart. You cannot allow your applications to take control of the deployment and restart the machine during the deployment process. You have to have an MDT do that, and I'll show you in a second where you do that. Click Next a couple times and finish. Here's the one that we just added. Let me show you the one that I know I've added properly. If I double click on that and open the properties, we go to the details pane. This is where you will input the uninstall registry key name is in this field. And if this application needs to restart the deployment process, just go ahead and tell it reboot the computer after installing the application. That's allowing the MDT process to restart the machine, not the application. All right, so inputting that uninstall registry key is how you configure your applications to be found during this migration process. That's how it creates those lists. Remember I told you the deployment wizard will look on the MDT for all the applications you've configured, all the ones you've given an uninstall registry key. And then it matches that uninstall registry key with what's going on the XP machine. That's how it finds those pre-selected applications. All right, next step. MDT doesn't do this by default. You're going to have to go get a new script and put it in. And Michael Niehaus, who is the PM for MDT, who's sitting right over there and has a session on this afternoon as well, he's going to be showing you some additional things for migrating XP into Windows 7. He created a script for you, so you can go to his blog and just copy and paste the contents into a notepad file, or you can go to my website and just download the file itself. You have to name it lti-appdetect.vbs, and then you have to put it in your scripts folder on your deployment share. Then you have to tell MDT, oh, by the way, I want you to use that lti-appdetect.vbs script. That's the script that actually figures out which applications on the XP machine that you have configured in the deployment server need to be redeployed. Who's looked at your properties of your deployment share? Anybody in here? Be pretty advanced MDT users if you've been in the properties of your deployment share. We're on the Rules tab, and by default, this is what you'll see. I'm going to show you this in just a sec. The only thing you need to add is one line. So you'll want to just add user exit equals lti-appdetect.vbs. That's all you need to do to make this migration process work. So back on my 2010 server, if I show you what the deployment share looks like, I'm in Windows Explorer. This is the physical deployment share. This is my scripts folder. And here's my lti-appdetect.vbs. That's the script that I've put in there. Then inside the deployment workbench, which is where I am now, on my deployment share, I can right-click, go to the Properties, and the Rules tab. Notice what I have here. User exit equals lti-appdetect.vbs. This tab is also where you can automate that deployment wizard when it runs. You don't have to look at every one of those pages every time you do a deployment if you don't want to. You can automate all of that stuff right here. I don't have time to show you that in this session, but I do have a session later today that talks about server deployments, and I'm going to come back to this and show you how to automate the deployment wizard when you deploy server operating systems. For now, we'll cancel that. 2 more steps before you can actually perform your first migration. the first step is to create a task sequence. Okay, so what I've done right now, I've added operating systems. On this deployment workbench, I have some server OSs. I have 2008 R2. I also have Windows Server operating systems as well. I've added that XML notepad as an application. You can also choose to add operating system packages, patches, and you can add drivers. Then you grab a task sequence, right-click, and tell it New Task Sequence. I'm just going to keep this really simple. Give it an ID and a name, and it really does help for your own sanity. If you go ahead and document just a little bit in this comment field, just jot down real quick what's supposed to happen after this task sequence runs. Because the whole purpose of a task sequence is to say, go grab that one operating system, grab those 3 applications, those 20 drivers, those 15 patches, and this is what I want to deploy. So this task sequence might deploy Windows 7, while another task sequence will deploy Server 2008 R2 with completely different applications and drivers. All I have to do is create the task sequence. So let's see how long it takes to create one of these. Give it a name, ID. I'm going to choose the standard client task sequence template. There are other templates. There are ones for servers and other things you can do. We're going to choose that one. Tell it which operating system we'd like to deploy. Windows 7 Ultimate. I'm not going to specify a product key right now. Give it a full name, organization, and an IE homepage. Give it a password, confirm it. If everything looks good, go ahead and click Next. The progress bar comes up, finish. That's how long it takes to create a task sequence. It's really quick. And you guys are probably going to end up with a bunch of task sequences when you first start playing around with MDT. So make sure you just spend 2 minutes and document in that comments field at the beginning what this task sequence is supposed to do for you, or it'll get confusing really quick. So that's our task sequence. Everything's configured. Now you're ready to start. Just like I did on that XP machine. I clicked Start, Run, and I gave it the UNC path, the Universal Naming Convention for 2010 Server, Deployment Share, Scripts folder. I launched lighttouch.vbs, which kicked off the whole process. And these are a couple steps that you don't see, remember? This is where it goes over to the MDT server, finds all the applications I've given uninstall registry key names to, scans the registry on the XP machine, creates the pre-selected list. Then USMT runs, and this is the lovely little command that it runs. Does anybody want to type this in every single time you do a deployment? USMT is a command line tool, and it's got just a couple of command lines that you run. You can do scan state, which scans for the user state that puts it into something called the user store, which we've talked about so far can be stored locally on that machine, or you can put it on a server across the network. You'll see load state here in just a second. Steps 7 and 8, that machine boots into a Windows pre-installation environment, comes up, installs Windows 7. Applications are installed from the MDT's deployment share. And then USMT applies the user state back to the Windows 7 machine. And this is the lovely little command that it runs for you. If you'd like to do these manually, you can. You can type those out or copy and paste them so you can see the process run yourself. I told you I would spend a little bit more time talking about when I ran that at the very beginning. We started the demo, and we saw the pre-selected application, but then I could deselect it, canceled that out, went back into the script, made one little teeny tiny change. This is that change. So that you can't deselect that application. What I did is I came into LTI appdetect.vbs script, and on the line that has set O applications equals O environment.list item, changed O applications list item to mandatory applications instead of just applications. That's all you have to do. You don't have to update the deployment share, which sometimes can take a while to do. You just have to restart the deployment wizard on the XP machine again. If you rename your computers, like when that XP machine came up, his name was XP, and I renamed him to Win7 MKT for marketing. Well, in Active Directory, you're still going to have that old XP name there. So if you are going to rename your machines, pop into Active Directory and go ahead and delete out the old name so it doesn't get cluttered. All right. Do you have any questions on the refresh scenario? You guys good with that? Yes. Yeah, so if I don't choose to rename the computer, is Active Directory going to be okay? Absolutely. It couldn't care if you're running XP or Windows 7 on it. The computer object with that same computer name is fine. Yes? Okay, so the question is, when you go back into ltiappdetect.vbs and you change that from just applications to mandatory applications, does that change all of them? Or can you say just pick 1, pick 7, pick 9, pick... It changes all of them. There's another way I'm going to show you right here where you can change just specific ones. But that's in the replace scenario, not the refresh. And you know, one of the big things that I have to say this that I don't like about the refresh scenario, here, you don't format the hard drive. I like to format the hard drive in between OSs. It's the only time you ever get to do it and really start from scratch again. But think about this for a second. If you've just run USMT scan state and you stored everything locally, and then you format the hard drive, what do you think happens to the data? Exactly what you think. So if you do want to format the drive, you can always store the data on a server someplace, format it, put Windows 7 on it, and then bring it back down. Yes? Can you redo your partition sources? Sizes. Can you resize your partitions? Absolutely. There's a Windows System Image Manage script that gets created under the hood. I'm not going to show it to you right now because I have a whole talk on this tomorrow, I think. But MDT, one of the biggest benefits you get from MDT is all these tools that run under the hood that are all command line. You saw the USMT command lines. Some of these guys are huge, and the syntax is different for all of them, so they're a little bit confusing to use manually. MDT uses a lot of those tools under the hood and just gives you these nice, friendly wizards and asks you questions, and you're done. You don't even realize what's happening under the hood. So under the hood, you have an automated unattended script that's created that has partition sizes in it. You can open that script, which I'll show you the script tomorrow at the Wake and volume activation talk. You can open that script and you can size your partitions anything you choose. So the answer is yes, you can. It's set by default to give you that 100 meg BitLocker partition, but that's a hidden partition. So his question is, okay, you said on that XP machine we had 40 applications installed, but you only configured 3 on MDT. The other 37 are gone. Those were things people brought in from home that weren't supposed to be there to start with. So those are gone. We're not going to reinstall those. If you want to do all of them, you can. There's no limit to number of applications you can configure in the deployment workbench. I was just using that as an example so you'd know that only the ones you configure in MDT that match on the XP machine are the ones that get pre-selected and reinstalled. So you could have chosen all 40 if you wanted. Is there a warning? Nope, there's no warning. You have to know right up front which applications on that Nexus. You guys are usually going to have lots and lots of meetings on this, right? I know in the States they have like meetings for 2.5 years for a task that takes 5 minutes to do. It's insane. Is it the same over here? Are you guys more efficient? Please tell me you're more efficient. We have managers that their jobs are just to go to meetings. We never see them for months on end. And you never get any go-ahead to do anything. Yes? If you create an image of your machine, would you want to import it into XP mode? Let me answer Two answers to that one question. First of all, if you create a WIM image using ImageX, or there's also a task sequence that will go to a machine, sysprep, and create and capture an image of it. So you can create your own custom WIM file. Show you this real quick. I'm back on the MDT server in the deployment workbench. I'm going to right-click Operating Systems and choose Operating System. I'm going to import. The first thing I can import is a full set of source files. Well, that means I have the DVD or the ISO file. I'm going to point to the root of it and just grab the whole ball of wax and bring it in. Second option is, can I import my own custom WIM file I've created? So here's where you would import a custom WIM image of an entire machine. We call these usually like a FAT image. Sometimes they have just corporate approved applications in them. Some people put everything they want in them, all applications, patches. It just makes it more difficult to change things later on if you do that. And then the third setting there is you can go to a Windows deployment server, the WDS box, grab all the OS images and pull those into the MDT as well. So first of all, you wouldn't want to create an entire image of a machine and put that in XP mode. XP mode is normally just used for applications that won't run on Windows 7. Maybe the company's gone out of business, they're not there anymore, and this is your company's accounting package, and everybody wants you to keep it because that's how they get their paychecks. So you would install that application into XP mode, not the entire operating system. Does that answer your question? He said, I was just thinking about those 37 applications that you didn't choose to configure in MDT. So if the reason you didn't choose to configure them in MDT is because they cannot run on Windows 7, you can always look at application compatibility, ACT, see if you can't shim those applications. If shims aren't working, then you could install those applications in XP mode. And if you're not familiar with XP mode, it's pretty cool. It looks like you're just running an application, but under the hood, it opens up a virtual machine and runs the application in the virtual machine. It thinks it's running on an XP box, but the user doesn't see all the stuff that looks like the virtual machine. So XP mode's pretty cool. Yes?
What does it classify as user data?
Pardon?
What does it classify as user data? When you're importing the user state and user data.
What is the user data? What makes up the user data? I've got some slides, once again, on this tomorrow that lists all the applications that it gathers the application settings for. But one of the cool things with USMT is it doesn't just go look in My Documents. It'll go look on the whole hard drive saying, hey, I'm supposed to find Excel, XLS, Docs, DocX, and it has this whole about 60 different file extension types. Looks through the whole hard drives looking for that data. And then it will import all of it over into Windows 7. So I've got a slide tomorrow that has all those extensions listed. If you want to customize that and add or remove extensions, you can. It's a piece of cake. And I'll talk more about that tomorrow. Yes? Does it take care of all the users in that machine? If you're logged on as an administrator, yes. If you're logged on as one of those users, it just gets your stuff, nobody else's. All right. I'm going to cancel out this because we're not going to add an OS right now. Let's check in on our XP machine, see how it's going. It's booting Windows up. We'll come back over to the slide deck. We're doing awesome on time. All right, that was the refresh scenario. Now I want to talk to you just a little bit about the replace scenario because it's incredibly different. So I've still got my XP, SP2, or SP3 machine, and we have our MDT deployment server. In a replace scenario, you're simply going to add your applications to the MDT's deployment workbench. You're not going to go to the XP machine and gather information from that. That doesn't matter. It wouldn't work here. Then you're going to launch that lighttouch.bbs script from your XP machine. User state is gathered and stored on the server, not on that local computer. Because you're tossing that one out with the garbage and bring in a brand new machine. So if you stored the user's data on the old machine, you just tossed it out the window when you threw the old machine away. So you want to store it on a server somewhere. Bring in a brand new computer, boot it to WinPE, install Windows 7 on it, install the applications from MDT, then USMT runs. It goes over to the server where you've stored user state, and it pulls all the user's data, settings, and application settings back down to that Windows 7 machine. Configuring your MDT applications in a replace scenario. First of all, it doesn't use LTI appdetect.vbs. That's not going to help you here. When an application is added, like we just added XML Notepad to the deployment workbench, when that happens, MDT generates a random, globally unique identifier, a GUID, for that specific application. To find that GUID, we go back over to the 2010 server, double-click my application, and if we look right down here, there's the application GUID. So to configure MDT to always deploy this application, I would copy this GUID, go back into the properties of my deployment share, Rules tab, and give it mandatory applications, or you can do applications that you don't want it to be mandatory, so here's how you can pick and choose which ones. And then just give it the GUID after you've added that to the deployment workbench. So you add your app, get your GUID, add it to the Rules tab. A little bit different than that LTI appdetect.vbs. And just to make sure you guys see, this is in the slide deck. When you get the slide deck, I like to make sure and document my demos, so when you get the slide deck, you guys can sit down with the deck itself and just go through step by step and just do the exact same things that I did. That's why I try to make my decks almost just documentation for the demos that I do. This is what your Rules tab will look like when you're done. So the replace scenario steps. Big issues that are different from the refresh is you have new hardware. You're going to store the user state on a server other than the local machine. You're going to create a new task sequence, but this task sequence won't be the standard client task sequence we created last time. This will be a standard client replace task sequence, which is another one of the default templates that is there. We would have just clicked on the down arrow and chosen that. You'll also start this lighttouch.vbs from XP. Choose that new standard client replace task sequence you had created. User states captured, stored on a server, machine boots to WinPE, and then you'll get a nice little finished message that comes up, and if the screen is white with pretty little blue text on it, you know everything went fine. One of my favorite colors is salmon. I love salmon. And one of their error messages, one of their error screens, when it comes up, it's this great big, and it's this beautiful shade of salmon. But the only time you get it is when something has gone terribly wrong with your deployment. So the only time I get to see that screen is when I've done something really, really silly. So what you want to see is the white screen with the blue background print, which hopefully you're going to see in a second. Then you'll boot that machine into the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit WinPE. How many of you have created a WinPE? Quite a few. That's awesome. All right. So for those of you who didn't raise your hand, the Windows pre-installation environment is a way for us to boot a computer into a different operating system in order to either create an image of that computer or apply an image to that computer. Maybe it's a bare metal machine that doesn't have anything on it. You got to get it booted up and connected to the network. That's what WinPE will do for you. In my deployment share, boot folder, MDT creates these WinPEs for me. And it calls them Light Touch PE. It creates 64-bit WIMs, 86-bit WIMs. And then it converts those WIM files, those WIM images, into ISOs. So I could then burn those to a CD. You could put the WIM files on an external hard drive or UFD and boot using those. These MDT WinPEs are pretty smart. They know who the deployment server is, and they know the name of the deployment share they're supposed to connect to. So there's not a lot of work for you to do. Once you boot up an MDT WinPE, they pretty much know what they're doing. And you can automate it, so you could boot one up, and it just deployed whichever task sequence you had chosen. You don't see any of the screens at all. So you can pick and choose how far you want to go with the automation. All right, looks like we're getting close. And that's going to be perfect timing. We're almost done with the deck. Here's the difference between replace and refresh scenarios. You're not going to gather information from that XP machine. Can't store the user state locally. I know I've said that like 5 times, but it's really important because when I've done this, I have stored it locally and then, flattened the VM and then said, oh, wait, I needed that. And this one's going to install Windows 7 to a brand new machine, not to one that has XP on it already. So what we covered was migrating your XP machine to Windows 7, maintaining users' data and settings. We'll see that in a second, hopefully. Made sure applications that were previously installed on XP are now installed on the Windows 7 machine. And the tool we used was MDT 2010 Update 1. Installing applications. Shows you it's actually installing XML Notepad. And while this finishes up, almost done. Does anybody have any settings? Differences between refresh, replace? Questions on Windows pre-installation environment? Or anything else I did here?
In your replace scenario, when you're doing that, when you're capturing the MDT data from the old client, can you set a disk scrubber task to run at the finish of that so that you don't care where that old hardware ends up? Or is that something you have to otherwise manage to erase the data on the machine you're disposing?
Okay, I'm not following you completely. So you're saying on the XP machine in a replace scenario, I'm going to throw that machine away. User state runs, and then you want to scrub it. You didn't store the user state on that machine. You stored it someplace else, but you're saying you still want to scrub that? You can put anything you want in a WSIM script. So you could have a script that comes up and formats that hard drive. It's not really scrubbing. I mean, if you could do a low-level format, that would be much better. And I don't think you're going to be using WSIM scripts for that. You could boot to a WinPE and run utilities that could do that type of thing. All right. Got one last thing to tell you guys. That guy's taking a little bit longer. I wanted to make sure you knew when the other deployment sessions are. Like I said, Mike Niehaus is going to be doing an XP migration to Windows 7 today at 2:55. Is that right, Mike? All right. And then I've got one later tonight, 5:25. Boy, it's a late session. Whew. That's going to be deploying server operating systems using MDT. You can do some really, really cool things. If you want to make a machine a domain controller, it's one check mark in a box. You want to make it a DNS server, DHCP, Hyper-V, terminal server, it could not be easier than what I'm going to show you this afternoon. Then tomorrow's my last talk. That's going to be deployment made easier. The reason it's made easier by that talk is because you can troubleshoot all the other tools. Because under the hood, a lot of the other tools are using the Windows Automated Installation Kit, and most of those tools are command line driven. So unless you know those tools, you can't truly troubleshoot the other tools properly, and you're going to spend a lot of time working on issues that you wouldn't have to if you knew the wake tools. And I'm also going to spend about 15 minutes on volume activation in that session for all you enterprise guys. There's lots of hands-on labs for deployment. And as you can see, I'm not sure why this is taking so long this time. It took 20 minutes 3 times this morning when I ran this silly thing. So it's taken quite a bit longer. It's for storing user state, but you can see XML Notepad is installed. It's the machine that had XP, now has Windows 7. What was that? You know what? Let's go see. No. That's really strange why it's taking so long this time. It looks like everything's restored properly. The last note, guys, here's my Twitter handle. For anybody who wants to follow me on Twitter, I've got a deployment book coming out, hopefully November timeframe. And I also have some Microsoft deployment training videos coming out that I'm doing with Train Signal. Those should be coming out as of November 1st as well. And my website is www.deploymentdr for deployment done right. It's not deployment doctor, although it kind of works both ways. And you guys can follow me on Twitter to find out when these are actually coming out. On that note, I'm going to bring it back over here, see if, yeah, it's done. Yay. All right, guys. Thanks a lot for attending this session. Anybody who wants business cards, I have cards up here with my